Hey, Bastish here for 64K and welcome to another episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. And if you've never watched this show before, I review 3 different shoot 'em ups from 3 different decades on any systems. And today I'll actually be joined by a guest, Mega Dru. Yeah, so we both started our channel at the same time. We're in the trenches together, fighting for that first 1,000 subs, which is super brutal. We used to comment on each other's videos. He's a good guy. He's recently restarted his channel, and he focuses on mainly arcade stuff, also some console stuff, like countdown videos. Really good stuff, so please check it out and give him a sub if you see what you like. He'll be contributing 1 review to this episode, and I'll be doing the other 2. So let's hit up that first decade, the 1980s. So let's jump back to 1988 for the release of Armalyte on the Commodore 64. This horizontal scrolling space shoot 'em up was published by Thalamus, who were at the time predominantly a C64 game publisher that was formed as an offshoot to Zap 64 magazine. They had quite a streak from the get-go in the shoot 'em up department, with C64 hits like 1986's Sanxion and 1987's Delta and Hunter's Moon. Armalyte was developed by Cyberdyne Systems. It was their first and unfortunately last game. The team was made up of John Kemp on system programming, Dan Phillips on main programming duties, Robin Levy on graphics and level design, and Martin Walker on music and sound effects. Walker had previously worked on Hunter's Moon for Thalamus. The game was marketed in magazines as the sequel to 1987's Delta, but in retrospect it bared no resemblance to it in any way, shape or form. In many ways it's a traditional shoot 'em up, but if you look a little bit deeper, it's very unique in almost every way. First off, the beautiful sparse graphics with their shiny metallic look really made the game stand out from other C64 shooters at the time. That deep thumping sound of Martin Walker's title screen music and the excellent unique sound effects immediately drew you into something altogether different. This was also a shooter that was player friendly, which was the opposite of the genre at the time. Dying meant only a small downgrade in weapons, and you didn't have to restart the level from the beginning. It actually gave you a chance to get into the game and enjoy the experience without constantly restarting again and again and again. And here's a quote from graphics and level designer Robin Levy about that. "A lot of single load games and even some arcade games had short levels and the player restarting at an arbitrary checkpoint, minus all his weaponry, which is a horrible way of extending a game's lifespan. So with Armalyte we had the player restart immediately with a limited penalty on his arsenal, which meant that the player never got stuck on a single part of a level but would scrape through to see just a little bit further. It was a great philosophy and one of the big reasons I always came back to the game again and again. It comprised of 8 massive levels with its assortment of mid and end of the level bosses to deal with. It was also 1 or 2 players simultaneously, which was an extremely fun way of playing it with a friend. Playing by yourself though was just as much fun, with its excellent array of weapons and a simple and easy to use drone which hovered around your ship and you could manipulate into any position depending on the action. I played this game for countless hours, always getting a little bit further each time, which is one of its best features. I thought I'd finish this off with a quote from Dan Phillips, lead programmer. "We aimed incredibly hard and played it, minor incremental revisions to the code and level design without any real regard for how long it was taking allowed us to craft the game. So check it out, it's one of the C64's best shooters." And now let's go on to the 90s. And now let's jump on over to the 90s for the 1994 DOS classic shooter Raptor Call of Shadows by Cygnus Studios and distributed by PC Legends, Apogee Software. Cygnus Studios were a PC computer games company from Chicago, Illinois. In the early 90s they teamed up with Apogee and released this 2D vertically scrolling shoot 'em up gem. Their relationship with Apogee was more than just Raptor. They also had their hands in a bunch of other classics like Duke Nukem 2, Blake Stone, and many more. In the late 90s, they renamed themselves Mountain King Studio and continued to publish their own games up until the late 2000s. Apogee up until that point was one of the few PC companies making console-style platform games and action games on the PC, so why not take a shot with a classic arcade-style shoot-'em-up? Nobody was doing them on the PC either, so Raptor's development was well underway. Playing this game in DOS back then was a truly weird experience. PC, console, and arcade games were so far removed from each other, and to play an arcade-style shooter in DOS was an awesome experience, and boy, it didn't disappoint. The game is made up of 3 massive levels or sectors, and each one of those has 9 sub-levels for an overall massive 27 levels. It definitely bucked that arcade-style trend. After the super cool intro, you get to choose what sector you want to start in. Bravo is basically a great rookie training course. Tango is harder with more diverse variety in enemies and landscapes. And finally, the outer regions has you traveling to other planets and is definitely the hardest of the bunch. All levels though are open to be replayed as much as you want, which leads to Raptor's more unique feature, at least for a shooter of that era, and that's mining for money. Points don't exist in this game. Everything you shoot has a monetary value, which accumulates with every on-screen kill. After a mission, you can blow all your cash at the local weapon shop and upgrade your ship. You definitely do need to do a bit of mining in this game to survive some of the harder levels, but the action is so much fun that I didn't really mind it. Also bear in mind that replaying levels you have completed means they automatically upgrade in difficulty, so be ready for it. The game features your usual array of mid-bosses and end-of-the-level bosses, plus every type of ground and ship-based enemy you used to see in this style of game. The harder the enemy is to kill, the more cash they are worth, or you can just nuke them with a mega bomb and be done with it. This game is such a blast to play, from its awesome looking arcade quality 2D graphics to the excellent rocking soundtrack that has so many memorable tunes. The game eventually went on to sell between 80 and 90,000 copies, and the PC magazine of the day, Computer Gaming World, said in 1993 of the game, Apogee's most professional and competent release. Raptor is currently available on GOG, Good Old Games, on PC, which is an easy way of playing it for really cheap. If you're a console or arcade only gamer, you owe it to yourself to at least try this out. It's just a fantastic dive into 90s shoot 'em up action. And now over to Mega Dru.
Dimahoo, a bullet hell vertical scrolling shoot 'em up delivered by a combination of developer Raising and publisher Capcom. This was one of the last arcade games released on Capcom's CPS2 hardware, and it's a festival of bullets, bombs, and bounty hunters. Raising took on previous employees of Toplan who went bankrupt in 1994. Toplan were masters of the shoot 'em up genre, and this trend continued with Raising as they delivered classics such as Battle Garaga and 1944 The Loop Master. Raising was incorporated into A-Ting in 2000, and since then there has been less focus on shoot 'em ups. Dimahoo was the sequel to 1993's Saucer Striker and 1994's Kingdom Grand Prix. Kingdom Grand Prix was an interesting shoot 'em up that incorporated racing into the game. Dimahoo features 4 selectable characters and 4 hidden characters that are accessed by using a code. Each character has an individual set of strengths and weaknesses, including speed, power, range, and bomb. The story sees an uprising of goblins from the depths of Earth. These goblins are taking over the world, and it's up to you to put a stop to them. The graphics are fantastic, and I just love the small details in the backgrounds, especially the crowds that gather to cheer you on. I was really impressed by Dimahoo's soundtrack. Each stage has some awesome music, and this is accompanied by quality sound effects and speech. The gameplay is fast and smooth, with up to 2 players taking to the skies. You have a standard fire attack, and a choice between fire and ice magic which you can switch between during play. The fire and ice elements play a big part in the game, as certain enemies will be more or less vulnerable to each one. The boss battles are one of my favourite parts of the game, as you must focus your attacks on each part of the enemy to destroy it piece by piece. Dimahoo is an awesome shoot 'em up, but it's also very difficult, and requires some thoughtful strategy if you're going to get through it. They were very serious in the intro when they asked the question, "Are you great?"
So why did I choose Armalyte? Well, the simple reason is that that game felt like an arcade game on the Commodore 64. What I didn't mention in the review is that gameplay wise, the way it moved, the way it made you feel when you're flying around. It felt exactly like an arcade game. It didn't feel very rigid. It just flowed extremely well. Also the fact that when you died, you weren't brutalized. You know, they didn't like punish you and make you start all over again. Everything just seemed to flow forward, which was always a cool thing about that game. I just love it. The music and graphics are obviously fantastic, so it's definitely worth checking out.
It's really hard to find any fault with Dimahoo. It's a quality shoot 'em up packed with all of the elements that put it up there with the best. With no home ports available, it's sadly one of those games that has been ignored, and that's a real shame. If you're a fan of shoot 'em ups and haven't played it, make Dimahoo the next one that you play.
And as far as Raptor goes, it was a 90s arcade game on DOS, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you lived through the 90s and that style of game, PCs were mainly point and click adventures, heavy RPGs, just heavy games in general. Yes, there were lots of arcade games also, but it's not really what it was known for. You know, arcade games were arcade games, console games were console games, PC games were in their whole other bracket, but just playing that game on DOS was just super cool. And it's not just because I was playing it on DOS, it really is a good shoot 'em up. It's got unique elements, you know, like the mining for money to upgrade your ship. You can save it all the time, so you're constantly upgrading yourself, which is kind of like PC mechanics, especially for the 90s. So it was different. Music is fantastic, everything about that game. It's also a cheap buy on GOG, so even if you're not a PC gamer, you should just check it out. It's totally worth it. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, and Mega Dru for this episode of Shoot 'em Up Decades. He will be joining me again for the next episode. We'll cover 3 more random shoot 'em ups of equal excellence. If you can like and subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.